In a courtroom where fairness is presumed and justice is sacred, one decision would shatter those expectations. A black man stands before the bench, calm but resolute, contesting a fine that seems more about prejudice than law. The judge, with an air of authority and a history of contentious rulings, barely listens before handing down a harsh and excessive penalty. The gavel strikes, a symbol of finality, but what the judge doesn't know will soon change everything. The man he condemns so readily holds a truth that could challenge the very foundation of the courtroom. A revelation so unexpected it will leave everyone questioning who truly holds power in the pursuit of justice. What happens when those judged turn out to hold the ultimate authority? This is a story of prejudice, power, and the reckoning no one saw coming. If this story grabs your attention, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more thought-provoking tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in a situation like this? And leave a like to help bring these stories to a wider audience. Now, let's uncover the truth behind this case. Jordan Carter, a man of principle, unshaken by adversity, and guided by an unwavering commitment to justice. As a federal prosecutor, Carter has spent years ensuring the law serves its purpose, protecting the innocent and holding the guilty accountable. Known for his calm demeanor and sharp intellect, he carries the weight of responsibility with quiet confidence. But in this case, his identity was concealed, his stature unknown to the judge who would determine his fate. On the other side of the bench sits Judge William Harris, a figure whose name sparks both reverence and controversy in the town of Fairview. A veteran of the judiciary, Harris wields his gavel with an authority that leaves little room for dissent. Yet, beneath his years of rulings lies a shadowed reputation, a history of decisions that have disproportionately affected minorities, earning him both criticism and loyalty in equal measure. To some, he is a pillar of the community. To others, a reminder of the deep divides that still plague Fairview. Fairview itself is no stranger to tension. A town rooted in tradition, its streets bear the marks of progress and resistance colliding over decades. The courthouse, a grand yet aging building, stands as a symbol of both justice and the failings of those tasked with upholding it. Within these walls, countless lives have been shaped by verdicts that often depended as much on the person behind the bench as the law itself. And on this day, in this courtroom, two men would clash, not as equals, but as symbols of a larger, unspoken struggle. It began as an unremarkable drive on a quiet afternoon. Jordan Carter, on his way to visit family, approached an intersection, cautious and deliberate. Yet, the flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror signaled trouble. The officer, abrupt and stern, accused him of a rolling stop, a minor infraction if it had even occurred. What followed was a citation that seemed out of proportion to the alleged violation, carrying a hefty fine with no room for explanation. Carter, seasoned in recognizing the subtle and overt forms of bias, stayed composed. Years of navigating such encounters had taught him patience, though the injustice of the situation was not lost on him. With the citation in hand, he made his way to the courthouse, determined to contest what felt like a deliberate targeting. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was as formal and unyielding as the judge himself. Judge William Harris, seated high above, presided with a confidence born from years of authority, yet his reputation spoke of something less admirable. Known for his stringent rulings and dismissive demeanor toward minority defendants, Harris approached each case as an opportunity to assert control rather than seek fairness. Carter presented his argument with clarity, pointing out the inconsistencies in the citation. But Harris, with a quick wave of his hand, interrupted. His tone was sharp, dismissive. "The law doesn't bend for excuses," he said, cutting short any chance for explanation. Without further deliberation, he issued a fine far beyond what the situation warranted, a decision that left the courtroom silent. Standing there, Carter faced a choice. He could reveal who he was, a federal prosecutor with the power to command respect and upend the judge's assumptions. But instead, he remained quiet, a deliberate decision to let the moment unfold. This was no longer just about a traffic violation. It was about something larger, something that could only be confronted by allowing the process to continue unimpeded. As Carter exited the courtroom, there was no sign of frustration or defeat in his expression. He had seen enough to understand the deeper implications of what had transpired. For Judge Harris, it was just another case, another name to process. But for Carter, it was the beginning of a confrontation that would shift the dynamics of power and perception in ways no one could have anticipated. Jordan Carter had a choice to make: accept the fine quietly and let the matter go, or appeal the decision and confront what he knew was a glaring injustice. For Carter, a man who had built his career on seeking accountability within the justice system, the answer was clear. He filed an appeal, not as an act of defiance, but as a test, to measure the integrity of the courtroom and the man who presided over it. The days leading up to the hearing were marked by meticulous preparation. Carter, though determined to remain anonymous in his profession, prepared his arguments with the precision of someone who understood the system better than most. He pored over legal precedents, analyzed the wording of the traffic citation, and constructed a case so airtight that it would leave no room for dismissal. Yet he kept his true identity hidden, determined to face the process as an ordinary citizen, without the privilege his position might afford him. When the day of the hearing arrived, Carter walked into the same courtroom where Judge Harris had previously dismissed him. The air was heavy with routine proceedings, but for Carter, the stakes were far from ordinary. As he stood before the bench, Harris's demeanor was as familiar as before, curt, disinterested, and laced with a subtle arrogance. The judge leaned back in his chair, glancing over Carter's appeal documents with little more than a cursory glance. Carter began his argument with calm confidence, outlining the flaws in the original citation and pointing to inconsistencies in the officer's account. His words were measured, his tone respectful. But as he spoke, Harris interrupted him repeatedly, cutting off explanations and dismissing evidence with abrupt remarks. "This is a simple matter," the judge said. "You're making it more complicated than it needs to be." Each interruption was a reminder of the imbalance in the room, but Carter remained composed. He answered every question with precision, never once raising his voice or showing frustration. His demeanor, though understated, carried an air of authority, something that didn't go unnoticed by the few onlookers in the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, Carter met briefly with a colleague who had accompanied him for support. The colleague, well aware of Carter's position as a federal prosecutor, urged him to end the charade. "You've done more than enough to prove your point," they said. "Why not just tell him who you are?" But Carter shook his head, resolute in his decision. "The lesson isn't in what I tell him," he replied. "It's in what he reveals about himself." As the hearing continued, subtle hints of Carter's expertise began to emerge. His ability to navigate the legal jargon with ease, the way he cited obscure case law without hesitation, it all hinted at someone with a deeper understanding of the law than an average defendant. Harris, however, seemed either unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the implications. He pressed forward with his dismissive remarks, convinced of his own authority in the room. For Carter, the courtroom had become more than a place to contest a fine. It was now a stage where the dynamics of power and prejudice played out under the guise of legality. And as the proceedings drew to a close, it was clear that the real confrontation was yet to come. The appeal hearing reached its critical moment. Jordan Carter, standing before the bench, delivered his final arguments with the same calm determination he had shown throughout. His points were clear, concise, and grounded in undeniable facts, yet Judge Harris remained unyielding, his demeanor unwavering as he prepared to dismiss Carter's appeal with little more than a curt ruling. But Carter wasn't finished. He paused, looked directly at the judge, and for the first time spoke with a tone that carried a weight far beyond the case at hand. "Your Honor," he began, Before you render your decision, there is one more piece of information you should consider." The courtroom fell silent. Even the faint sounds of shuffling papers and distant whispers ceased as Carter continued. "I am Jordan Carter, a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice. I have spent my career ensuring that the law is applied fairly, that justice serves all equally, and that bias does not tip the scales." The judge froze, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face, quickly followed by unease. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Carter as if re-evaluating everything he had previously assumed. For a moment, the authority he wielded so confidently seemed to falter. Around the courtroom, the reaction was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the small audience, hushed voices exchanging words of astonishment. A few exchanged glances, their eyes wide with realization. This was not the ordinary defendant they had assumed him to be. This was a man with a deep understanding of the law, a man whose presence in that courtroom now carried an entirely different weight. Carter's voice remained steady as he continued. "I chose not to disclose my position earlier because I wanted to be treated as any other citizen would, but what I witnessed here today is not justice. It is bias, thinly veiled as procedure, and it is this very bias that erodes the trust citizens are supposed to have in our legal system." Judge Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his composure now visibly shaken. For a man accustomed to control, the realization that his assumptions had been wrong, and publicly so, left him grasping for words. Yet none came. Carter's gaze remained fixed on the judge, his tone measured but firm. Justice is not about power or authority. It is about fairness. It is about ensuring that the law applies equally, regardless of who stands before you. Today, Your Honor, you had an opportunity to demonstrate that, and yet you chose otherwise. The weight of Carter's words lingered in the air, an unspoken challenge to the very foundation of the courtroom. Judge Harris, for the first time in the hearing, looked uncertain. His usual confidence had given way to silence, his discomfort evident in the tense lines of his face. As Carter concluded his speech, the room remained quiet. The power dynamic in the courtroom had shifted entirely, leaving Judge Harris no choice but to confront the reality of his actions. And in that moment, the gavel that once symbolized his authority now felt like a burden, heavier than he had ever imagined. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Harris, a man who had built his career on authority and swift rulings, now sat motionless. His hands gripped the edge of his bench, his eyes fixed on the papers before him, though it was clear his focus had drifted. The weight of Jordan Carter's revelation hung in the air like a verdict of its own, rendering the gavel in his hand powerless. After what felt like an eternity, Harris cleared his throat, his voice breaking the stillness but lacking its usual force. "Mr. Carter," he began, though the words seemed to catch in his throat. He corrected himself. "Federal Prosecutor Carter, I have reviewed the arguments, and I see no reason to uphold this fine. It is hereby overturned." There was no applause, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet murmur of acknowledgment from the small audience. The judge hesitated again before continuing. "I owe you an apology. My actions in this case were not reflective of the impartiality this court is sworn to uphold. For that, I take full responsibility." Carter stood motionless, his expression calm but unreadable. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the apology but offering no more than a measured response. "Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady, "acknowledging the error is a step toward accountability. I accept your decision and your apology, not for my own sake, but for the integrity of this court. Justice must always be the goal, even when it is difficult to achieve." With that, Carter turned and exited the courtroom, his steps deliberate, his presence still commanding the attention of those left behind. Outside, the scene was anything but quiet. News crews had already gathered, their cameras trained on the courthouse steps. Reporters clamored for details, their voices overlapping in a frenzy of questions. Carter stopped briefly, turning to face the press. He spoke not of his own experience, but of the larger issue at hand. "This is not about me," he said firmly. "This is about ensuring that the justice system works for everyone, regardless of their background. Today was a reminder that we must always hold ourselves and our institutions accountable to the principles of fairness and equality." The story quickly gained traction, sparking a wave of discussions across the town and beyond. Headlines questioned the impartiality of local courts, and commentators debated the broader implications of bias within the judiciary. Fairview's residents, many of whom had long felt the weight of systemic inequality, now had a story that reignited conversations about change. As for Judge Harris, the incident left an indelible mark on his career. While his position on the bench remained, the scrutiny of his actions forced him to reevaluate his judgments and conduct. For the first time, the man who had so often wielded authority was now under the watchful eye of the community he served. And for Jordan Carter, the case was closed, but the lesson remained clear. True justice is not found in silence or submission, but in standing firm, even in the face of unfairness. His decision to let the process play out, to reveal bias through action rather than confrontation, was a reminder of the power of integrity and the enduring fight for equality. As the dust settled on what began as an ordinary court case, the echoes of its impact rippled far beyond the courtroom walls. Jordan Carter's decision to confront injustice without revealing his identity until the pivotal moment served as a stark reminder of the assumptions we often make about others. It was a quiet but powerful challenge to a system that too frequently places appearance over truth and authority over fairness. This case raised a question that lingers in every corner of society. How often do we judge others based on appearances rather than seeking the truth beneath the surface? The events in Fairview didn't just expose the flaws in one courtroom, they illuminated the biases that shape countless interactions in our daily lives. Across the town, the conversation began to change. Local activists used Carter's story as a rallying point, organizing community meetings and town halls to discuss the need for judicial reforms. Citizens who had previously felt powerless began sharing their own experiences with bias in the justice system, finding strength in collective voices. In classrooms, teachers encouraged their students to debate the case, inspiring the next generation to think critically about fairness and equality. A montage of scenes emerges, a group of young people painting a mural on the courthouse steps that reads, "Justice for All," community leaders shaking hands as they sign petitions calling for new oversight measures, a small child pointing to a newspaper headline, asking their parent, "Does this mean things will get better?" And while Judge Harris continued his tenure on the bench, his rulings were now subject to closer scrutiny. His peers, too, began reflecting on their own decisions, aware that their actions would no longer go unnoticed. Fairview's courthouse, once a symbol of authority, was slowly becoming a place of accountability. For Jordan Carter, the journey was never about personal vindication. It was about demonstrating that change begins with action, even if the results aren't immediate. His case wasn't just a confrontation of one judge's bias. It was a testament to the power of resilience, patience, and integrity in the face of injustice. In the end, Carter's story leaves us with an undeniable truth. The pursuit of justice is a shared responsibility. It demands that we challenge prejudice wherever it appears, hold institutions accountable, and above all, recognize the humanity in one another. As the credits roll on this chapter of Fairview's history, the final words linger like an unspoken challenge to us all. Justice is not what we say, it is what we do. What role will you play in ensuring it is served for everyone? Stories like this are not just tales of individuals. They are reflections of the world we live in, and they invite us to question the systems we trust. What do you think about what happened in Fairview? Have you witnessed or experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice could be the beginning of a conversation that inspires real change. If this story resonated with you, there's more to uncover. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that highlight the fight for justice, equality, and the resilience of the human spirit. By subscribing, you join a community committed to shining a light on the truths that matter most. Don't stop here. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, a friend, a family member, or anyone who believes in the power of accountability. Together, we can spark discussions that lead to awareness and ultimately change.